Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here because we are diving into a topic that affects, well, literally every single one of us, yet it is almost entirely misunderstood by the mainstream. I mean, if you just glance at the headlines, the narrative about inflation seems perfectly neat and tidy, right? But beneath the surface, that narrative is hiding a much larger structural, mechanical failure in our economy. So today, we're going to look past those easy excuses. We're rolling up our sleeves to dig into the actual data to understand exactly why the Federal Reserve's traditional tools for fighting inflation are suddenly backfiring.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's how we're going to break this whole thing down. First, the real inflation story. Then, the 2% target, the historical Volcker playbook, and the broken brake pedal in today's economy. Finally, we'll look at the money printer and a pretty radical fix proposed by Warren Buffett.
All right, Section 1, the real inflation story, looking past the headlines. So right now, practically everyone on TV is blaming inflation on conflicts in the Middle East. It's this incredibly clean cause and effect narrative that's just, really easy to swallow. But there is a massive hole in this story. The Federal Reserve doesn't actually use the headline numbers you see on the news. They keep their own scoreboard. They target inflation measured by personal consumption expenditures, or the PCE. Now, the conflict in the Middle East they're blaming, that started just 5 months ago. But get this, the Federal Reserve has missed its PCE inflation target for 63 months in a row. That is more than 5 years straight. The PCE is currently sitting at over 4%, which is more than double the Fed's target, and it is continuing to climb. We are literally using a 5-month-old excuse to diagnose a 5-year-old problem.
Moving to Section 2, the 2% target, the Goldilocks number.
Now, you might be wondering, why do we care so much about this 2% target? It isn't just some trivial stat for economists. It is the bedrock of every economic decision in the U.S. Every rate you pay, your mortgage, your car loan, what your savings account pays you, it's all priced off what people expect this number to be. So why exactly 2%? You'd probably assume it fell out of an impossibly complex math equation. But actually, scratch that, it was just chosen as a happy medium. Think about it. If you aim for 0% and a recession hits, interest rates are already near the floor. The Fed gets one cut and slams right into zero. They're structurally trapped, risking a decade-long depression. But you can't aim too high either. If you push it to 4%, prices double every 18 years, making it totally impossible for businesses to forecast costs. That makes 2% the absolute perfect Goldilocks cushion.
And for a long time, hitting this number looked completely effortless. We had this period called the Great Moderation from 1985 to 2007. Growth was steady, inflation was low, and the economy acted like a self-regulating pendulum. It would swing up, swing down, and automatically come to rest right at 2%. You never even questioned it. But here's the secret. There was no invisible hand. There was a very real hand standing beside that pendulum, giving it a firm push back toward the middle every time it swung too far out. It was done so reliably that everyone kind of just forgot the pendulum was being pushed at all. But today, well, the thing doing the pushing is in deep trouble.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The Volcker playbook, how inflation used to be beaten.
To truly understand the trouble we're in today, we really have to look at how we used to fight inflation back when the Fed actually had room to maneuver. We have to rewind to the late 1970s. Inflation wasn't just drifting up, it was sprinting, peaking at over 13.5%. Enter Fed Chair Paul Volcker in 1979. He did what nobody else had the stomach for. He drove interest rates all the way up to an astonishing 20%. He deliberately triggered 2 back-to-back recessions, basically strangling the money supply until inflation simply starved. This was the famous Volcker shock, and you know what? It absolutely worked. Inflation plummeted by more than 10 points, leading us right into that great moderation we just talked about. So the obvious question forming in your head right now is, if it works so well for Volcker, why on earth can't the Fed just run that exact same playbook today?
Which brings us to Section 4, the broken brake pedal, the hidden debt trap.
Volcker had one massive advantage that nobody really talks about, and it is the critical variable making his playbook completely ineffective today. When Volcker claimed the throne in 1980, the national debt was about a quarter the size of the economy, just 25% of GDP. By today's standards, that is practically nothing. The country could absorb the economic damage of a 20% interest rate, acting as a clean, highly effective brake pedal. But guys, that world is gone. Today, our national debt is sitting around 100% of GDP. The last time it was this high was during the Second World War. When debt is this massive, the mechanics of raising interest rates completely flip on their head.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. When the Fed raises rates today, the government has to pay significantly more interest on what it already owes. Net interest is now running over $1 trillion a year. Let that sink in. That is more than the entire U.S. military budget. Back in 2021, interest ate up about 9 cents of every single dollar the federal government collected in taxes. This year, it's devouring 19 cents. That is a staggering transfer of wealth happening just to service our debt.
So this creates what we can call the dual pedal effect. The Fed raises rates to act as a brake to cool the economy down. But those massive trillion-dollar interest payments we just mentioned, they don't just vanish into thin air. They land directly in the hands of pension funds, banks, foreign governments, and wealthy investors. That newly injected money then gets spent, lent out, or rolled right into the next bond at an even higher rate. So the very move meant to pull money out of the economy quietly sends a massive wave of cash right back in, acting like a gas pedal. At 25% debt to GDP, you don't even feel the gas. But at 100% debt to GDP, both pedals are floored at the exact same time. The brake is effectively wired directly to the accelerator.
All right, Section 5, the money printer, the underlying structural failure.
To really grasp this, we have to look way past headline inflation. Headline inflation is honestly like feeling an earthquake. By the time you actually feel the ground shake, the fault line slipped months ago. The real fault line here is the money supply itself. Back in 1981, economists Thomas Sargent and Neil Wallace predicted this exact disaster. Their theory shows that if a government constantly runs a deficit, the central bank only really gets to decide if the debt takes the form of cash or bonds. When the Fed squeezes cash to fight inflation today, the bond side just has to grow to make up the difference. Those bonds pay interest, which compounds the debt even faster. Ultimately, the central bank is mathematically forced to just print money later. The Fed isn't actually fixing inflation, they are just postponing it. And it's definitely no coincidence that the Fed recently tapped Thomas Sargent to lead a brand new inflation task force. They know full well this 45-year-old theory is playing out right in front of us.
Which brings us to the Fed's ultimate emergency lever hidden in the closet, the literal money printer. During the pandemic, the Fed ran quantitative easing, meaning they essentially created money out of thin air to buy bonds. This flooded the system and pushed their balance sheet from $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. Unsurprisingly, this sparked our massive inflation problem. So to fight it, they reversed course with quantitative tightening in June 2022, letting bonds expire in an attempt to drain $2.2 trillion right back out of the system.
But here is the massive catch. You can't tighten forever. The U.S. financial system needs a certain baseline amount of cash just sitting around in it to function day to day. If you drain past that line, the whole system literally starts breaking. So what happened? On December 12th of last year, the Fed had to quietly turn the money printer back on. They started buying bonds again at roughly $40 billion a month, slowly refilling the balance sheet. Because of this, the M2 money supply, which is basically all the cash within arm's reach of the economy, is currently growing at over 5.5% a year. The fault line is slipping again, folks.
Let's move on to our final section, Section 6, Buffett's Radical Fix, Aligning the Incentives.
We are running two totally different stories in this country right now. The monthly headline arguments that everyone bickers over, and the underlying structural failure. And let me be incredibly clear about this. This is not a left-wing or right-wing issue. It is an American problem. Both political parties do it, because the core incentive of our government is always to spend more. I mean, nobody builds a successful career in Congress by promising people less, right? Just look at the grim reality we are facing. The deficit for this fiscal year alone is estimated at $1.4 trillion, which is 5.8% of the entire economy. That is drastically higher than our historical 50-year average of 3.8%. Our total national debt is rapidly closing in on $40 trillion. And thanks to that dual pedal effect we discussed earlier, the debt cycle just mathematically compounds. The more we borrow, the more interest we owe. The more interest we owe, the more we have to borrow. It is an unsustainable, never-ending repeating loop.
So how on earth do we actually fix a system where the incentives only ever point toward more spending? Well, Warren Buffett, the golden boy of the finance world, was asked how he would deal with the deficit, and he offered up a truly brilliant 5-minute fix. With his signature folksy pragmatism, he simply suggested, pass a law that says that anytime there's a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for re-election. He was laughing when he said it, but it's an incredible catch-22 for the political establishment because he is completely right about the mechanics. Right now, politicians are highly incentivized to promise more spending to win their campaigns. If you genuinely want to stop structural inflation, you have to forcibly change the incentives of the people writing the checks.
And this leaves us with a critical, almost uncomfortable question to ponder. Is Warren Buffett's plan to ban Congress from re-election over a 3% deficit way too extreme, or is it exactly the radical change we need? Every single year we put this off, the bill to deal with it just gets bigger and bigger. How long can this compounding debt loop really last before the entire machine completely breaks? I highly encourage you to keep this structural reality in the back of your mind the next time you see a simple, flashy headline blaming inflation on a 5-month-old event. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions.